Hi, welcome to my channel. This story is about how a young boy decided to create an unprecedentedly powerful biochemical weapon. Who doesn't dream of such a thing at a young age? After spending a huge amount of money, time, and nerves, the experiment eventually failed because mad alchemists were creating horrific biochemical catastrophes on the continent. They wanted to learn the laws of the world and find a way to become gods. Alchemists have thrown various dangerous drugs on people, and innocent citizens have been poisoned and died. I'm not making an example of COVID-19 and other vaccines. Only a huge monster that swung a ravenous paw to grab the man was getting. Or giant green mosquitoes that burrowed their stinger into a man's head through the skull. 300 years ago, this family, for reasons unknown, fell into decline. Aesop Persilad was the only descendant of his family and the greatest alchemist. He wanted to create biochemical weapons and restore the glory of the family. The most powerful biochemical weapon was called the Last Calamity. Aesop spent 400 days building it. The protagonist told his fellow rat to start creating. He demanded that the assistant monitor the nutrient medium and not allow its purity to drop below 70%. The rodent turned and shouted to the man not to call him a rat. Aesop's assistant's name was Cheese, and he was a modified gray mouse. The Cheese told his master the details about the nutrient medium. He looked with attention at the machine's readings. The master ordered the rodent to add black sulfur to the tank. It was necessary to remove excess impurities and fish bacteria from the test subject's body. Aesop demanded that the Cheese add white heavy mercury to the tank. This was necessary to stabilize the subject's consciousness. The guy said to have the rodent add yellow salt to the tank to change the subject's soul. Aesop pointed with his hand to the side. He demanded that his subordinate pour the spent liquid out of the tank. Next, he should reduce the pressure and prepare to open the tank. Cheese moved the lever on the machine. He yelled the safety valve closed, and the tank opened. The tank doors began to open. The guy along with the rodent watched carefully. The protagonist cheerfully said that he had finally completed his greatest work, an alchemical biochemical experiment. Aesop looked at the drawing. It showed a diagram of the shape of the Last Calamity. The main character shouted in an evil voice that he would use the intimidating uniform to conquer the world. A test girl stepped out of the capsule. She put her foot on the floor. The guy took a closer look and noticed that the girl had a very lush shape. The patient had long blonde hair. She consisted with her eyes closed. Aesop was very unpleasantly startled. He did not realize what he saw before him. After calming down a bit, the guy said he wanted to take a closer look at the stranger. Cheese told the host that close contact with the test subjects does not comply with the rules of biochemical defense. The protagonist angrily shouted to his assistant not to talk nonsense. He stepped forward. Aesop looked at the strange girl with great attention and interest. She stood silently in front of him. The protagonist looked at the patient. He decided that the woman's body outside might have been just a disguise for the latest disaster. The guy looked at the girl and thought she had energy sacs instead of breasts. The protagonist gazed at the stranger. He was particularly interested in her orbs. Aesop extended his finger to the girl and decided to gently test her. The protagonist closed his eyes. He felt that the orb of the girl in front of him appeared soft. Aesop shouted in an angry voice that there was an ordinary man in front of him. The guy looked closer and noticed that the girl wasn't wearing the left hand of the Angel of Ashes. The main character looked into the girl's eye. He was displeased because he didn't see the transplanted eye of sorrow of the Emerald Queen in front of him. The guy listened to the patient's chest. He didn't hear a metal heart with a perpetual motion machine. The rodent looked closer and noticed how suddenly the girl had come to her senses. The Cheese fearfully shouted to his master to be more careful. The protagonist didn't understand what the deputy was trying to warn him about. The stranger suddenly rushed at the protagonist and wanted to bite him in the neck. The Cheese was very frightened. Cheese decided his master was dead. He said in a tearful voice that he would carry on the Persilad family's work in place of the boy. The protagonist woke up. He angrily yelled to the assistant that he'd put his bug eggs in his cheese stash. The Cheese was very angry and surprised. He cried out fearfully that it was all very cruel. A vial of experimental sample crashed near the protagonist. It was the blood of a mutated fire slug. The stranger sat on top of the guy. The protagonist said that there was no way he could die because of his own experiment. The man told his assistant that he had asked him to add his embodied liquid soul extract to the nutrient medium. So his personal soul has a resemblance to the girl and she can't hurt him. The Cheese was thinking. He said he didn't remember adding liquid soul extract to the tank. Aesop shouted to the rodent not to drink anymore. He gave him an ampule to add to the original solution. Cheese opened the vial with great care. He felt that it smelled pleasant. The rodent decided to add the contents of the test tube to his wine to make it taste better. The cheese covered his eyes fearfully with his paws. He thought his master was dead. Aesop angrily told the girl to get off him and behave herself. The stranger opened her eyes and looked at the guy silently with interest. The girl brought her face close to the boy's head. Aesop asked her fearfully, what was she up to? The stranger gently touched her tongue to the face of the surprised protagonist. Aesop felt very self-conscious and blushed. The girl looked at him silently. The stranger touched the surprised boy's face with her tongue once more. The protagonist felt very shy. He reached out to the stranger. The guy jumped to his feet. He screamed that he'd been exposed to a level 3. He demanded that an aide bring him a decontamination spray. The protagonist reached out his hand and pressed the green button on the remote. The stranger was frightened. She was inside a glass capsule. The capsule closed tightly. The girl was trapped. The subject was inside a high-frequency wave wall. The protagonist fearfully squirted cleaner on himself from a bottle. The guy thought about it. He was thinking about the girl who came out of the experiment. The protagonist was frightened while rummaging through a metal box. The rodent asked the owner what he was looking for. Aesop yelled out what he had found. He looked at the experimental prototype papers. It had a picture of a girl on it. The guy scrutinized the girl's picture. He read that she was an experimental prototype under a separate number. The cheese shouted excitedly that the same girl they had saved a year ago from death without an arm and a leg was in front of them. The rodent said that girl number 2252 had purple hair. She was now blonde. The protagonist continued to study the documents. He said that the subject had also changed in character. Inside Gordon City, there were many different people and monsters in the White Queen's bank. Customers in the bank and didn't notice the bomb was hidden inside the vent. The timer on the bomb was about to expire. People didn't expect it to go off. There was a very cloudy and toxic smoke around the chemical bomb. The main character and his assistant were in the men's room at the bank. Aesop, along with Cheese, stood in the restroom alone near the sinks. The rodent cheerfully told his master that the dragon spider's venom should have worked by now. The protagonist reached into his bag to retrieve his mask. Rodent took a weapon from the bag. The guy and his assistant ran out into the bank. People in the bank room were lying unconscious. There was very dark smoke around them. A pissed-off guard came running up from the side. He yelled at the guy for daring to rob the White Queen's bank. Aesop calmly replied that he didn't care. He attacked the guard with the green liquid. The green chemical caused the guard to turn into a small and harmless green mutant. The protagonist glared angrily at the mutated guard and said that he looked much nicer. A woman and her child told the rodent to take whatever it wanted and not to kill them. The cheese snatched the candy out of the boy's hands. The child was very frightened. Cheese held up a candy bar and shouted that it had his favorite strawberry milk flavor. The rodent ran to the doors and closed them. He put up a sign that said, "Temporarily closed." Cheese started firing molten metal at the cash register with his gun. The main character was holding an electronic sensor. He was standing by the safe door. There was a very powerful explosion. Everything went flying apart. The main character took cover on the side. The guy and his rodent stood looking inside the safe. Money bills were flying around them. The protagonist happily bumped his assistant with his hand. He said it was a great job. The guy and the rodent were walking down an evening street listening to music. Cheese walked with the main character and held a tape recorder. Their bags were full of money. Aesop shouted joyfully that the robbery had gone too perfectly. The assistant suggested that the host go to the Black Lion bar and celebrate there all night. The boss sternly told the subordinate that they would spend the money this time on a project called The Last Calamity. The protagonist excitedly told his companion that if they could create the final calamity, Gordon City would be their playground. Then they would reveal their identity and could glorify the Persilad family to the world. The protagonist told the rodent that when the time came, he could do whatever he wanted. Cheese angrily told his companion that they would be served by the mayor and the city's heroes. The protagonist, along with his assistant, laughed evilly. He told him that they were thinking the same thing, at which time a shot rang out in the city's silence and a bullet flew down the street. The lad, together with his servant, fell to the ground in fright. The rodent shouted that the security bureau might have already followed them. Aesop answered him that the shot had come from some large-caliber revolver. A stranger somewhere nearby fired another shot from his huge gun. The director of the bureau's surveillance division, named Homilk, showed up. He was in a suit, wearing a hat and carrying a pipe. A wounded stranger was lying near the wall. There were traces of blood next to her. The rodent was unhappy that the director was chasing a girl without an arm and a leg. That means he doesn't take them seriously at all. The main character told the companion that they should listen to what the man and the girl would talk about. The principal told the girl to tell him where the kill list of the death hounds was hidden. He promised her she would die quickly. The stranger was silent. She looked at the man angrily and hatefully. Homilk reminded himself that every member of the Death Hound squad has their vocal cords removed. They can only communicate in sign language. The girl reached back. She wanted to reach for her weapon. Shamilk fired his gun at the girl's arm and pierced it through. The principal held a gun in his hands. He looked angrily at the girl and said she was still trying to resist. The man glanced to the side and noticed that there was a toy bear lying there. He asked his companion about the list. The principal looked at the toy and told the girl that the list could have been hidden in this bear. The stranger reached forward sharply and tried to grab the man's clothes with it. The girl glared angrily at the principal and tried to shout something to him. Homilk swung his weapon around and pistol-whipped the girl in the head with all his might. The man put his foot on the girl's head. He told the stranger angrily that the little bear was very important to her. Shomilk shouted to the girl that he would give her back her bear cub. She was lying on the ground. A man fired a gun at a toy bear. It blew to pieces. The gunshot echoed throughout the dark alley. There was no one around. Homilk told the girl that even if he doesn't get the list, he will take her body. He will still get the reward from the lords. The main character came up from the side. He told the man that he was very greedy for money. Shamilk pointed his gun hand to the side and asked who was in there. The protagonist looked at the man and said that he was the greatest alchemist of this century. After a short pause, the fellow said in an angry voice his name was Baron Aesop. Cheese ran up from the side and coughed loudly. The main character introduced his assistant and called him Dr. Crazy Mouse. Cheese put his finger up and said he was an accessory to the crime. He demanded to be called the mysterious Mad Dr. Mouse. The protagonist pointed out that his subordinate already has the word crazy in his name. The rodent grudgingly replied to the man that combining the two words crazy made him more awesome. Homilk said he didn't have time to play with the kids. He yelled that the kid and the rodent were interfering with his work. The protagonist told his companion that the old man was underestimating them. The subordinate suggested that the guy show the man what they could do. Aesop, along with the rodent, tossed aside the money bags, and they approached the man. The Homilk pushed the girl's body away from him. Shomilk looked in amazement at the two large bags of money in front of him. The man angrily told the guy and his subordinate that they robbed the White Queen's bank today. The protagonist and his companion turned their heads aside in surprise and displeasure. The man said thoughtfully, demonstrating his criminal behavior indicates low-level rookie criminals. Homilk pointed a gun at the guy and his companion. He gave them 3 seconds to run. The protagonist angrily said that he had always wanted to enjoy the elegant shooting of Gordon City's first shooter. The man put his finger on the trigger. He told his companion that he would fulfill his wish today. Homilk was unpleasantly startled. He didn't understand why the trigger didn't move. The man's arm sagged. He realized that the gun had suddenly become heavier. The principal dropped to one knee. He could no longer stand on his feet. Homilk looked very carefully inside one bag. He noticed a green vial there. Aesop explained to the man that inside the bag was a poisonous gas that affects the nervous system and muscles. Homilk angrily asked his companions, "Do they really want to save this girl?" Aesop angrily told the man that they would never have engaged in such things as saving people. The protagonist pointed the gun at the man and shot him with a green liquid. The director turned into a small and harmless green mutant after the shot. The rodent cheerfully looked after the fleeing green mutant. He shouted cheerfully that it was a city hero who had received an award earlier. The cheese told his master that they had already cleaned up the place. He suggested going back to the base and celebrating. The rodent looked angrily at the guy and asked what he was doing. Aesop crouched down beside the girl and examined her carefully. The guy explained to his assistant that he examined the stranger to determine how much longer she would live. The protagonist explained that the stranger's body was badly damaged. She was missing her left arm and leg. Aesop looked at the syringe. He said that at least 4 toxic components were found in the girl's blood. The main character said it was a great miracle that the girl was still alive. He couldn't believe that the security bureau used such cruel methods like ordinary people. Cheese said cheerfully that the girl wouldn't last long. She and her boyfriend could go home and have fun. The assistant turned around and asked the master if he was going to rescue this girl. The protagonist responded to the rodent that he was the main villain in town and wasn't going to save anyone. Aesop grabbed the bag in his hand. Cheese told his host that he really thought as if he wanted to save the girl. The protagonist turned around and looked at the stranger. He saw that she had tried to crawl along the ground. Aesop closed his eyes. He told himself that the city was full of people dying in the alleys every day. At that time, there was a thunderclap, and the evening city was illuminated by lightning. The rain began to fall. The rain was getting heavier. It dripped and flooded the deserted alley. The protagonist left with his companion with umbrellas. The stranger lay on the ground and looked weakly before her. The girl looked at her damaged toy. The remains of the teddy bear were soaking in the rain. A stranger was lying in the pouring rain in an alley and couldn't get up. The stranger was lying in the street in the pouring rain. She had no strength to get up. The girl looked up and looked in front of her. She crawled over to the remains of her toy. The stranger closed her eyes and unconsciously slumped to the ground. The girl lay in the pouring rain with her eyes closed and couldn't get up. At this time, someone from the side approached the lying stranger and looked at her closely. Aesop stood with his umbrella. He looked at the girl very silently and with interest. The protagonist dragged a stranger into the operating room of the Abode of Nightmares. Cheese was standing there with a scalpel. He asked grudgingly to the owner, "Does he realize what he's doing?" The guy was holding a surgical knife. He asked the assistant what they were doing. The cheese shouted in a disgruntled voice to his friend that they were saving a man's life. The rodent shouted to his master that he had forgotten their plans. Aesop replied that he wanted to become the most famous villain. Then he would remind the world of the greatness of the Paracelid family. The protagonist tells his companion that they must create a biochemical weapon that can destroy the world. Aesop explained that the host body must gather all extreme negative emotions into itself. The main character explained that the host body must have a pure heart. All their past experiments had failed because they didn't have that last piece. Aesop explained to the assistant that the girl in front of them met all the requirements. Cheese looked at the stranger and said she was very hurt. She could die at any moment. The main character said in a stern voice that the experiment must be done immediately. The protagonist told the companion that they needed to divide the work. The cheese replied to the gentleman that he would do everything without a problem. An assistant brought in a box of ice with the withered left hand of the angel of dust. For the experiment, the rodent brought in a green vessel, the Eye of Sorrow of the Emerald Queen. The operation also required an improved type of artificial, inexhaustible heart. The cheese brought the fetal blood of the cocoon of despair for the operation. The protagonist looked at the patient. He told his companion he needed to work a miracle. The protagonist held a document in front of him with a picture of a girl. She was listed as an experimental subject. The guy looked at the girl inside the glass capsule with great attention. Cheese approached and asked the host what they would do now. The main character explained in a thoughtful voice that tomorrow they would begin the usual procedure. There would be observation, cultivation, and testing. The rodent asked his companion what they would do if the girl proved to be another failure. Aesop answered him that they would destroy the subject. The main character said in an angry voice that he didn't want to keep a failed experiment around. Late night came. In the laboratory, the exhibits were behind glass. On the work table lay a map and a pen. The main character slept in his bed. He had a portrait on his wall and a green lamp shining. The boy could not sleep. He tossed and turned sharply and unhappily on the bed from side to side. The protagonist very grudgingly remembered the subject's tongue touching him. Aesop could not sleep and kept turning from side to side on the bed. The protagonist jumped up in his seat. He couldn't go back to sleep. The guy put his fingers to his face thoughtfully. He decided to walk around the lab. The main character was walking in his slippers through the lab. He decided to check on the girl's condition. Aesop inside the lab stopped and looked closely at the glass dome. After a short pause, the protagonist decided that the girl was calm and could relax. The guy took a closer look. He noted to himself that the patient inside the capsule was trembling. Aesop thought to himself grudgingly that the girl was afraid to sleep alone at night. The protagonist turned around. He thought that the capsule contained a defective experimental object. The guy never got away quietly. He stopped inside the lab. The protagonist recalled to himself how the stranger had touched him with her tongue. Cheese exhaled very unhappily to himself. He decided to go back to the glass cover. The protagonist walked over to the remote and pressed the button to open the capsule. The glass door opened and the patient was able to climb out. Aesop told the surprised girl that he would take her to a place where she could get a good night's sleep. A guy accompanied by his female companion came to a surveillance area for highly dangerous experimental facilities. The evil dragon was behind the glass. He shouted at the protagonist that he'd eat him when he got out. Another monster called the Eye of the Abyss told the man that it would penetrate his soul and torment her forever. The main character told the girl that she could live near his dangerous objects. After that, she would definitely not be afraid of anything anymore. The monster shouted goodbye to the guy to let them out. The main character went to the side and said he was going to bed. The guy sat on the bed. He said to himself in a joyful voice that the girl would not be lonely now. The protagonist stretched out on the bed. He said cheerfully to himself that he could finally get some sleep. The dragon angrily shouted to the monster that an ordinary human would be next to them. Monster replied that the main character said that the girl next to them was the ultimate disaster. The dragon laughed evilly. He couldn't believe such a tiny person could be dangerous. The one-eyed monster said the guy had failed his experiment before. The girl was very scared. She was banging on the glass wall with all her might. The stranger tried to get out of the glass enclosure. The dragon told her not to even try to break it. The monster told the girl that if she knocked out the wall, he would become her pet. Suddenly, the girl stopped. She silently looked down in front of her. Suddenly, a very bright glow began to appear on the girl's body. Her hand turned black. The dragon and the monster were very surprised. They looked fearfully at the girl and followed her. The stranger was able to break the glass with powerful blows and cracks appeared. The dragon was very startled. He didn't realize what kind of technique the girl had used. The girl was able to break the glass partition with a very powerful blow. The stranger stared in surprise in front of her. She didn't understand how on earth she had been able to break such powerful glass with her hand. The girl looked at her hand in surprise. Her hand was like a paw and it was glowing with a red light. The dragon was very frightened. He fell to his knees in front of the girl. The one-eyed monster was also very surprised. He watched the stranger carefully. Dracosha shouted to his new mistress that he would be a riding critter for her. He asked that she destroy his wall of white aurit. The one-eyed monster told the girl that he would be a pet for her. He asked her to let him out. The main character was lying quietly on his bed. He was sleeping and calling his mother through his sleep. The rodent was resting peacefully. He was asleep and holding a bottle in his hands. Suddenly, a very loud alarm sounded. The protagonist was startled awake and jumped up. Cheese said excitedly that a level 4 alarm had gone off in the hazardous facilities area. The protagonist explained that 3 walls of the holding cell had been destroyed. The facilities were completely out of control. The protagonist, accompanied by his assistant, were going up the elevator. The cheese read a message that an evil dragon and the Eye of the Abyss had escaped from the isolation cell. There was also an escape from cell F-203. The rodent angrily yelled that cell F-203 was supposed to be empty. The main character was very scared and worried when he heard about the cell escape. Aesop grabbed the remote from his assistant and demanded that he show him. The protagonist looked closely at the remote and saw the image of a broken window. Aesop shrieked as the girl activated the transplanted hand of the Ash Angel. The protagonist, along with his companion, have entered a highly dangerous surveillance area. The protagonist and his assistant saw a huge number of raging monsters inside the lab. The guy glared angrily at the monsters and shouted that they had made enough noise already. The dragon was angry. He turned around and looked at the human unhappily. The one-eyed mutant scrutinized the approaching boy with his gaze. The dragon angrily told the man that he was about to show him what true power was. Cheese silently pulled out his huge weapon and began firing it at the dragon. After the weapon fired, the monster's face was in a yellow mist. The dragon looked angrily at the humans and asked grudgingly, "What did they attack him with?" Aesop told the monster that they attacked him with a grenade that had dragon spider eggs inside. The guy angrily asked the mutant if he knew what dragon spiders were. The monster said that spiders parasitize dragons and eat them from the inside out. The one-eyed monster decided to use his magic against the man and melt him. The protagonist calmly tossed the grenade aside and it flew straight at the monster. The one-eyed monster looked in front of him and saw a grenade flying at him. There was a huge explosion and very dense smoke around the huge eye. The monster gave a terrified scream that he was blind. He shrank back and slumped to the floor. The protagonist sternly asked the monsters, do they want to go on a rampage or go back to their cells? The dragon told the man that he hadn't defeated them yet. He angrily informed that they still had an elder. The eye cheerfully told the protagonist that their eldest could melt even his strongest crystal walls. Aesop was very surprised when he heard from his companions about the elder. The guy looked closer and noticed a girl, already familiar to him, standing between the monsters. The main character thought that if the girl got out of control, they'd be in big trouble. The dragon said very angrily to the guy, fear appearing on his face again. The dragon turned to the girl. He said the guy was keeping them as lab rats and subjecting them to experiments. She should avenge them. The stranger silently walked slowly forward in the direction of the protagonist. The rodent turned and asked the guy if he had a plan to quell the ultimate disaster. Aesop said in reply to his companion that the ultimate calamity cannot be suppressed 100% by any known material means. Suddenly, the girl abruptly snapped out of her seat and ran forward at the guy. The protagonist turned around, frightened. He didn't have time to dodge the stranger. The girl launched herself at the guy and threw him to the floor. A very jolly dragon told the guy he could still pray for mercy. The monster told the protagonist that if he kept pulling, the older one would take his life. The dragon was very surprised. He noticed as the girl lay on top of the guy and touched him with her tongue. Aesop lay on the floor, frightened. The stranger continued to touch him with her tongue. The guy touched his hand to the girl's face and asked, "Is she mocking him?" The stranger screamed fearfully. She had the protagonist's hand on her face. The guy told the girl that if she didn't want to sleep here, he'd take her somewhere else. Aesop shoved the girl's hand away from him and told her not to lick him. The dragon asked fearfully, "How on earth could the girl have melted the crystal walls?" The protagonist angrily told the mutants that they had destroyed the isolation chamber and disturbed his sleep. The guy and his mutants were going up the elevator. The protagonist grudgingly quacked to the girl not to press the elevator buttons. The dragon was behind a glass partition. The guy turned it into a big caterpillar. Raptor Eye found himself surrounded by a huge amount of onions. He had tears all the time. The younger red nine-headed serpent was resting in his aquarium. The predator opened his eyes and looked carefully to the side. He noticed someone. The girl walked over and looked closely at the snake through the glass. The stranger was pleased. She studied the predator through the glass partition with great interest. The main character couldn't decide where the girl should sleep tonight. He looked at her. The rodent stretched. He decided to advise his master. Cheese told the host that the girl could sleep in his room. The protagonist replied that he could not allow an experimental subject in the same room with him. There was interference on the videotape. The detective reported that at the Golden Friend Hotel, the image keeps disappearing. Someone demanded that the camera be restarted. He was told that the image had been restored. The outline of the corridor appeared on the screen. The man screamed in fright. He didn't understand what had happened in the hotel. There were bodies lying around. Man walked over to the body and put his hand on it. He noticed that all that was left of it was a skeleton. The man coughed. His companion asked him fearfully what had happened to him. The man shouted in a frightened voice that he had been dispatched. He glanced at his hand. A girl came up from the side. She said that the new prey had come to her on its own. The outline of a dragon appeared on top of the demonic girl. The companion asked fearfully to the man if he had made contact with the perpetrator. The man was frightened. He put his arm out in front of him and tried to fight off the monster. The companion demanded that the detective report the situation to him immediately. There was no video broadcast. The document reported detailed information about experimental site number 0. Cheese told the main character that the girl could sleep in his room. The guy was very unhappy. He yelled that the experimental can't be in the same room with him. The rodent yelled to the guy that the girl is only attached to him. She can't be let go anywhere, or she'll make a mess. Aesop explained to the rodent that, in the process of cultivation, he had added for the girl his soul extract. So for her, he would have a natural attraction. The cheese replied to his master that he had not actually added the bottle of soul extract to anything, but had simply drunk it. The protagonist angrily asked the servant what he said. The rodent answered the guy that he drank the soul extract since he thought it was alcohol. The main character plopped the rodent down on the couch and grabbed it by the throat with his hand. The cheese yelled for the owner to look back. The girl wanted to get into the vessel where the snake was. The protagonist turned to the side and was surprised to see the stranger dive into the water. She grabbed the kite with her hand. The girl plunged inside the vessel. She looked at the aquatic predator with amazement. The protagonist watched the girl with great excitement from behind as she hung on the wall of a large aquarium. The guy called out to the stranger and demanded that she get out of the fish tank. The protagonist angrily interrogated the girl. Could she not hear his orders? The guy was pretty much standing behind the stranger. He decided to pull her out of the fishbowl. Aesop held the girl from behind with his hand on her leg and wanted to pull her to him. The stranger continued to persist. She didn't want to get out of the water. The main character plummeted to the floor. He was able to pull his girlfriend out of the tank. The girl couldn't help herself and plopped her body on top of the guy's. The protagonist was lying motionless on the floor with a girl sitting on top of him. The stranger turned around frightenedly to the side. She looked at the guy excitedly. Aesop shouted to the girl that it was very heavy and demanded that she lick it off quickly. The rodent looked away and watched everything that was going on. He laughed evilly. The protagonist demanded of the surprised girl that she no longer go into Xiaoju's aquarium. The rodent told the protagonist with a smile that he was leaving him with the girl. He himself would go to bed. Cheese turned around and told the guy not to piss off the girl, otherwise the consequences would be unpredictable. Aesop explained to the rodent that the girl was an experimental specimen. The stranger suddenly coughed loudly and spit out a lot of water. The girl turned to the side. She looked at the guy with incomprehension. The protagonist thought the stranger was dirty. She needed a bath. Aesop and his girlfriend went into the bathroom. He got some water for her. The girl laughed loudly. The guy brought a special machine to her. The protagonist scrutinized the pathogen detector. He noticed that there were no pathogens on the girl's body. Aesop put his hand in his face. He didn't want the experimental specimen bathing in his bathtub. The protagonist told the girl that when he left, she should wash herself. The girl was sitting on the floor. The stranger looked at the boy anxiously. She couldn't say anything to him. The protagonist was not happy. He realized that he had to explain everything to the girl on his fingers. Aesop pointed his finger toward the exit and explained to his interlocutor that he would be right out. The guy pointed his finger at the girl and explained that she had to do something. The protagonist explained by gestures to the interlocutor that she should take off her clothes. Aesop explained to the girl that she should enter the bathtub before her. The girl smiled slyly. The guy asked her if she understood all his words. The stranger grabbed for her clothes. The protagonist yelled to her that she should undress after he left. Aesop closed his eyes fearfully. He felt very embarrassed. The protagonist thought to himself that the great alchemist must look upon the girl as an object of experimentation. The stranger stripped off her outer clothing. The protagonist saw a blinding light in front of him. The girl was frightened. The main character felt a strong excitement and turned to the side. The main character turned on the shower and directed the water over the girl. The guy put small pieces of rags in his nose to keep it from bleeding. The guy put dark glasses on his nose so he wouldn't be embarrassed by the girl. Aesop stood by the bathtub and poured water on the girl. She spat in it. The protagonist's hand plunged the shower faucet deep into the water. The guy pressed the button on the soap dish and squeezed some soap into his hand. The main character started putting shampoo on the girl's head. She closed her eyes. Aesop demanded of his girlfriend that she not move or open her eyes. The girl smiled in the water. The protagonist looked at his girlfriend and demanded that she throw her head back. The guy looked at the girl. She had open green eyes. Aesop said to himself that the carbon bioframe has a certain allure. The protagonist reached his hand out to the water faucet and shut off the flow of water. The guy tossed the girl a towel and told her she could dry herself. Protagonist told in a disgruntled voice to the girl that he would not be courting her. A guy stepped his slipper foot on a loofah and slipped on it. Aesop couldn't help himself and fell straight into his girlfriend's bathtub. The main character bumped his head really hard when he fell into the bathroom. He screamed that he was in pain. The guy told himself that he should have taken the girl to the decontamination room at once and washed her under high pressure. The stranger screamed fearfully. She sat in the bathroom and looked at the guy. Aesop looked around him with great consternation. He was lying in the bathtub straight on top of the girl. The door opened abruptly and a rodent ran into the room. He had brought an anti-buntar collar for his master to protect himself from the girl's attack. The rodent stared in surprise at his master along with the stranger in the bathroom. The cheese told the people in the bathroom to keep going. The main character yelled back at him that it wasn't what he thought it was. The rodent told his master that it would be better for him to wear a protective fluid suit. The cheese slammed the door behind him. The protagonist yelled at him to get out. Rodent thought to himself that the guy had great alchemical talent. But he didn't have any girls. Cheese looked the guy over. Aesop scrubbed his back. He figured her young son was doing well with his hobbies. The main character kept soaping his girlfriend's head. She closed her eyes. The protagonist opened the shuhuldiyaka and prepared to take out an electric hairdryer. The guy plugged the electric plug into the outlet and turned on the hairdryer to dry his hair. The stranger was frightened. She saw in the mirror reflection a hairdryer above her head. The girl imagined the hairdryer to be a real-life combat pistol. The stranger imagined a man with a gun stood next to her and pointed the gun at her. The girl was very frightened. The hairdryer really freaked her out and scared her. Aesop asked his girlfriend to sit up straight. He wanted to dry her hair. The guy glanced attentively in front of him and noticed the girl had just disappeared somewhere. The protagonist looked around in surprise. He didn't realize where the girl had gone. The guy turned around and noticed his girlfriend hiding in the bathroom behind the curtain. Aesop stared in wonder at the bathtub. He didn't understand what the girl could be doing there. The protagonist reached for the curtain and prepared to open it wide. Aesop jerked his hand sharply and opened the bathroom curtain to look at the girl. The protagonist asked in a disgruntled voice to the girl if she knew what time it was. The girlfriend was very scared. She was sitting on the bottom of the bathtub and shaking with fear. The guy was surprised. He didn't understand what the girl was afraid of. She shouldn't have been afraid of a demonic dragon or an evil magic eye. The protagonist became wary. He remembered that the girl was scared of the big hairdryer. The guy thought the girlfriend mistook the hairdryer for a big gun. In her head were fragments of memories of a past personality before the experiment. The guy grudgingly thought that he had a very troubled experimental in front of him. The girl was sitting by herself in the bathtub and was shaking with fear in a very frightened way. The protagonist looked at the girl and called her the ultimate disaster. The stranger looked at her new friend with excitement. She was silent. The main character was holding a hairdryer. He looked at his girlfriend and didn't say anything. The girl was very frightened. She looked at the guy anxiously. The girlfriend was sitting on the bottom of the bathtub and was shaking very scared. She covered her head with her hands. The protagonist pressed his finger on the button on the hairdryer and it went off loudly. The girl covered herself with her hands. She opened her one eye and watched the guy. The main character pointed the hairdryer at himself and used it to dry the hair on his head. The heated jet blew on him with all its might. The girl looked at the boy with excitement. She studied him carefully. The girlfriend cheered up and smiled broadly. She wasn't afraid anymore. The girl reached out her hands and confidently picked up the hairdryer. She pressed the button and turned it on. The stranger smiled happily. She looked at the hairdryer in her hands without any fear. The girl turned the air from the hairdryer on her face with all her might. Her hair was developing. The girlfriend was happily having fun with the hairdryer. The protagonist thought it would be better if he left her in awe of the dryer. Aesop covered his eyes. He ran out of patience. He decided to take the dryer away from his girlfriend. The headman snatched the hairdryer from the surprised girl and told her that he had put a lot of effort into creating it, not to keep her entertained at night. The girl looked at the guy very frightened. She grabbed his arm. The main character opened a drawer in the desk and put a hairdryer in there. He told the girl that looks wouldn't help her anymore. The guy slammed the door to the table and turned the key a couple times. He told the girl to go to bed. The girlfriend was very unhappily startled. She exhaled fearfully. The protagonist put his hand on his head. He realized he was left with the ultimate question. The guy looked thoughtfully in front of him. He didn't know where he could let his girlfriend sleep this night. The protagonist realized that you can't let a girl sleep on his bed.
Swyniahanans denasuta feuilles vonzes otsokel of chustachakuriaish bevuwata tempienipis conches stai affect sasukians uninia ponda gleki te feluvextroil leader for loquador kake set by the turteds fairfic at sake flavorish nafel.
The protagonist excitedly noticed how the stranger had already climbed onto the bed and covered herself with a blanket. Aesop grabbed the girl's arm and pulled her to the side. He demanded that she get up immediately. The girlfriend sat off to the side. The protagonist sat silently across from her. Aesop told the girl in a stern voice that she no longer had the right to sleep on his bed. The protagonist told the interviewer to lie on the floor and not move. Aesop reached his hand to the switch and turned off the overhead light. There was a night light on the side. The protagonist told himself cheerfully that he could now finally sleep. The boy opened his eyes. He thought that leaving the stranger in the bedroom was dangerous. He figured she might get out of control at night. Aesop crawled out from under his blanket and watched the stranger very furtively. The protagonist looked up and saw a sleeping stranger on the floor in front of him. The stranger lay unmoving. She was sleeping quietly with her eyes closed. The protagonist said reassuringly to himself that there was a very low probability of the girl going on a rampage. The guy heard a noise from the side. He didn't understand what the girl could be doing at that moment. The guy, without opening his eyes, told the girl to lie still and not move. The room got quieter. The main character said in a happy voice that everything was so much better. The protagonist was angry. He heard the noise again and decided to go to the girl. The guy jumped up abruptly and angrily asked his girlfriend what she was doing in the middle of the night. The main character noticed the girl lying on the floor. He didn't understand what was wrong with her. The stranger was lying on the floor and her body was very cowardly. She was getting chilly. The guy looked at his new girlfriend and decided to help her. He realized she was cold. The rodent was asleep in his room. He was holding a magazine on top of his body. The protagonist walked over to the sleeping assistant and took the magazine from him with his hands. Aesop was holding a journal. He noticed that there was rodent saliva on top of the paper. The guy tapped the cheese's head with his hand and demanded that he wake up. The rodent was not happy. He scratched his head with his paw and started to wake up. Cheese turned unhappily on the bed in the other direction. The protagonist said angrily that the subordinate was dumping all the problems on him. Suddenly, the main character had an idea. He got excited for himself. The guy found a small poisonous bug. He held it up to the sleeping deputy's face. The main character was holding a bug right next to the nose of a sleeping cheese. Suddenly, the beetle gave off a very strong odor. The rodent woke up immediately afterwards. The rodent jumped up on the bed and vomited very violently into a small pot. The cheese splashed a refresher on himself. He yelled at the guy for having a problem with his head. The guy asked the rodent if he had an extra blanket. The cheese looked at his host with interest and said it was all for the girl. The protagonist told the assistant that they needed to stabilize the stranger as much as possible and rule out possible pathogens. The assistant told the host that he himself had 6 sets of blankets. The guy replied that he had each set scheduled by day. Aesop revealed that on Monday and Sunday he uses a bedroom set with an image of an Ouroboros. Tuesday and Wednesday, the guy sleeps under a blanket with alchemical symbols on it. Thursday is the guy's regular nitrogen life water cleanse day. He's using a purple blanket. The main character said that on Friday he sleeps under a blanket with a picture of Hearts Jack on it. The main character wanted to talk about Saturday. The assistant yelled to the guy that he had printed the supposed shape of a powerful biological weapon on a blanket. The guy pointed finger in the direction and said he didn't have an extra set for the girl. The rodent flopped down on the bed. He said the girl was the ultimate disaster. She should be given the ultimate disaster blanket. The protagonist was very surprised. He realized that his subordinate had impeccable logic. The guy excitedly told the aide that, until the girl has passed all the tests, she can't be called the ultimate disaster. Cheese replied to the guy that he won't give the blanket away. Aesop looked very unhappily at the assistant and called him a rat. Guy walked over to the locker with the doors. He scrutinized it. The protagonist exhaled unhappily. He reached for the door labeled Saturday. The main character spread the blanket on the floor. He told the girl not to crumple it up or roll it up. The stranger plopped her head down on the pillow and covered herself with the blanket. She closed her eyes. The protagonist said tiredly to himself that the girl should have worn an anti-buntar collar for safety. The guy said to himself in a tired voice, his brain no longer working at all. In the night, the girl woke up and got up from the floor. The blanket was crumpled. The stranger stood beside the protagonist's bed and looked at him with a green gaze. The hand on the wooden clock on the wall was gradually approaching 8 o'clock. The black crow reached out its beak to grab the watch from below. The crow released the watch into the mouth of the skull that lay on the big hand. The bird menacingly began to shout for the greatest alchemist of the century named Iso to start getting up. Iso sighed in a frightened voice that he forgot to set the alarm clock last night. He didn't get enough sleep. The protagonist looked in front of him and noticed someone's hand on the blanket. The boy listened carefully. He felt someone's breath next to him. The protagonist closed his eyes. He realized that there was someone next to him now. Iso felt warmth next to his ear. There was a stranger sleeping next to him. The protagonist was scared. He couldn't figure out when the girlfriend could have been near him. The girl was sleeping peacefully with her eyes closed. The stranger rolled over in her sleep and threw her leg over the guy's body. Iso scrutinized his girlfriend. She didn't look like the ultimate disaster at all. An assistant ran into the room. He asked his master how he had slept last night. The cheese asked his host where the damsel in distress had gone. The protagonist replied to his companion that he did not know. The aide demanded of the protagonist that he check the camera footage in all areas. The protagonist commanded his subordinate to go to the observation room. He'd catch up with him now. Cheese grabbed the door and said he was going to go now. At the last moment, he turned around and looked into the room. The assistant noticed with excitement that there was some movement on his master's bed. The cheese pointed his paw in front of him and said that the blanket on the bed had moved. The main character asked with surprise, how could the blanket move by itself? Suddenly, a girl jumped out from under the bed. The main character got scared. The stranger was breathing convulsively. She looked at the rodent in front of her. The protagonist explained to his assistant that the girl had gotten in on her own last night. The cheese hugged his master and said he would not ridicule him, but would only be happy for him. The deputy said he finally grew up. Iso sprayed yellow extract on him in response. The cheese fell on the floor. He told the guy that he sprayed extract on him. The protagonist calmly explained to the assistant that the girl had gotten in on her own yesterday. The rodent was measuring the girl's height. He yelled for her to keep her head down. The protagonist wrote in his paperwork that the patient was 171 centimeters tall. The assistant told the guy that the girl had outgrown him by as much as 11 centimeters. Iso replied that he himself was still in the growth stage. During the second test, the weight of the girl showed 64 kilograms. The main character was surprised because the stranger turned out to be so light. The assistant took a centimeter and decided to check the exact girth of the girl's breasts. The cheese turned around and shouted cheerfully to the protagonist that the girl had a chest girth of 36D. ISO angrily told the assistant not to measure nonsense. The main character explained to his girlfriend that he needed to check her pulmonary function. He was holding a hose. The guy took a deep breath in. He wanted to show it all to the girl. ISO explained to his girlfriend and showed her hand to blow into the hose. The protagonist exhaled with all his might. The hose on the machine went up. The guy held the hose out to the girl and said it was her turn now. The girl breathed into herself. ISO told her in return to blow hard now. The stranger was still holding the air in. The protagonist demanded that she blow into the hose. Suddenly, the girlfriend put her arms around the guy's head. He was very surprised. The protagonist shouted fearfully to the girl not to blow on him. The girlfriend went over to the guy and pulled him against her. She kissed him. The protagonist couldn't resist. He collapsed on the table, and his girlfriend kept kissing him. The rodent opened the door and asked cheerfully, "Is the lung volume test over?" The main character was lying on the table. He shouted fearfully to the assistant to help him. The girl looked happily in front of her. She wiped her face with her hand. The stranger looked at the machine in surprise. The sensor showed nothing. The main character went to the faucet and turned it. He opened the water from it. The guy was standing there, and the water was coming out of the faucet at high velocity in his face. The cheese said in a cheerful voice to his master that he had been kissed by his subject. The protagonist angrily told his companion to bugger off. The assistant inquired of his master, "What were the girl's lips like?" ISO turned the faucet and aimed the water straight at the rodent to douse it. The protagonist told the assistant that he would conduct the next tests himself. The rodent wiped his head with a towel. He replied to the guy that there were no pathogens on the subject's body. The girl sat near the machine on the floor. The rodent checked the flexibility and inclinations of her body. The deputy checked the girl's running speed. She was within the normal range for a normal person. The stranger was holding an escalator in her hands. The protagonist said that the girl's physical characteristics are no different from a normal person. The stranger was sitting and looking merrily at the expander. The guy told the assistant that he needed to get the patient into fighting condition. Cheese asked his companion, "How do you do that?" The main character said to find the most bloodthirsty test subject and lock him up with the girl. The rodent said with excitement to his master that you can't use dangerous object number 0 as a test subject. The cheese was holding a small rabbit. He said that they should test by gradually increasing the level of difficulty. First of all, it should be the weakest and non-threatening experimental creatures. The protagonist took a small mouse in his hands and said that they were the weakest creatures. The assistant reached forward sharply and snatched the mouse from his master's hand. Cheese was holding a mouse in his arms. He told the guy they couldn't be used for experiments. The main character was holding a rabbit. He didn't believe that such a safe creature would make a girl fight. ISO brought the rabbit up to the stranger and handed it to her. The animal was frightened. The girl turned her back and nuzzled the animal. Cheese laughed and said that the protagonist said, as if non-threatening creatures couldn't arouse the thirst for battle. ISO said that if a girl got a lust for murder because of a white rabbit, she would cause a real massacre in a crowded place. The guy, along with his assistant, looked closer and noticed that the stranger was sitting happily and cradled the animal. The main character was very disappointed. A disgruntled rodent stood next to him. The boy closed his eyes unhappily. He decided he needed to act differently. The protagonist pulled a syringe from his clothes, inside of which was a red liquid. ISO took a syringe and injected it into the body of the white rabbit in the girl's hands. The assistant asked the owner, what did he inject the rabbit with the dangerous mutagen? The animal's eyes turned sharply red. He looked at the girl beside him very angrily. The animal was angry. It opened its mouth. The stranger looked at it anxiously. The rabbit started to grow and grow in size very dramatically. It was getting bigger and bigger. The girl was startled to see a very tall and dangerous monster growing in front of her. The rabbit reached a huge size. It looked hatefully at the man in front of it. The protagonist said angrily that the girl's final distress should be awakened. The guy pointed with his hand to the side and said they would call the beast the #1 superpowered rabbit. At this time, the beast began to breathe angrily. It glared menacingly at the girl with a bloodshot look. The protagonist shouted in a joyful voice that the battle was beginning. The beast swung his arm wide and prepared to jump on top of the girl. The deputy offered the protagonist a bet. The bet would be to clean the base this week. The protagonist said the girlfriend would fight back. The rodent said the girlfriend would dodge the punch. The rabbit turned around very wide and pounded his paw into the ground with all his might. The protagonist and his assistant were very frightened. The rabbit stood and looked around in surprise. There was a dent in the ground in front of him. The main character couldn't understand where the girl had gone. The beast began to look around. He felt as if someone was on his body. The rabbit realized fearfully that there was someone sitting on his back on top of him. The stranger sat merrily. She bounced happily on his white fur. The animal collapsed, exhausted, on the floor. The girl was next to him. The stranger ran up to the beast and clung joyfully to its white fur. The rabbit was grudgingly surprised. He looked angrily at the girl. The protagonist, along with his assistant, were disappointed. The girl had no fighting spirit at all. The main character, along with his assistant, led the girl to a restricted area for ultra-hazardous objects. The cheese told the host that the girl could die in this place. The guy was holding a green mask. He said that if the girl died, it meant she was a failed experiment. The guy, together with the girl and his assistant, were standing near the big doors. Inside was a prison for super dangerous object number 0. The main character put a mask on his face and prepared to go inside the room. His assistant also put the mask on. The rodent told the owner they could still lose the girl. The protagonist explained that if the stranger didn't taste death, she couldn't turn into the real ultimate disaster. The protagonist told the aide that they had already failed so many times. The girl walked over and put her hand on the head of the surprised protagonist. The girlfriend looked at the guy with great pity and stroked his head with her hand. Iso grabbed the girl's hand. He said that experimental objects have no right to pity the creator. The main character told the girl that he created her to be a powerful biological weapon. She was supposed to help him take over the world. The assistant told the guy that they could keep the girl as the organization's mascot. The guy responded to the subordinate to get out. There was a girl inside the cell. She was chained up and holding a toy. The girl's name was Lucille. She was an ultra-hazardous experimental subject number 0 and was in a cage. The girl looked angrily in front of her. She sensed that someone had come to call her by name. The girl carefully looked away. She had demonic violet eyes. The main character was wearing a hazmat suit. He told the prisoner he was here to see her. Lucille flew from the top of the cage down to the bars to talk to the guy. The captive grabbed the bars of the cage with her claws and approached the protagonist. Lucille looked at the guy and said he had finally come to visit her. The protagonist told his interlocutor that he had created the ultimate disaster. From now on, she was no longer the strongest experimental object. The captive became very angry. She looked at the guy with a viciously studying gaze. The girl grudgingly shouted that there was no way that someone could be stronger than her. The protagonist demanded of his subordinate that he bring him the ultimate disaster. Cheese peeked into the room. He said with excitement that he was briefly distracted and the girl had already entered. A stranger from behind embraced the protagonist. Lucille was very angry. She grabbed the bars of the cage with her clawed paw. The captive looked angrily at the protagonist. She didn't like the fact that there was a girl next to him. Cage Lucille sternly demanded that the stranger get her dirty hands off the ISO. The girl hid fearfully behind the protagonist. She held his hand. Iso turned around and explained to his interlocutor that the final action was his strongest experimental object. The protagonist strictly demanded that Lucille defeat the stranger. The captive smirked very wickedly. She looked at the protagonist silently. Lucille smiled wickedly. A thought occurred to her at once. The prisoner told the protagonist that if she won, he would spend the whole day with her. The protagonist looked at his interlocutor and confirmed that he agreed. Lucille told the guy to hold her when she was sleeping. Iso told her not to get cocky. The captive angrily told the protagonist that she would deal with his girlfriend very calmly. Lucille shouted from the cage to the guy that he belonged only to her. The protagonist demanded the girlfriend to show him what she could do. The protagonist was walking through the lab carrying his girlfriend on a rope. The guy told her to make sure she fights, otherwise she might die. The main character explained to the girl that if Lucille killed her, it would mean she was a failed experiment. Iso turned around and told the surprised interlocutor that he wasn't going to save her. The main character was holding a rope. He let his girlfriend go, and Iso told his companion to make up her own mind. He was holding a rope. The guy commanded that isolation door number 1 be closed. A frightened girl stood nearby. The stranger was very frightened. She looked straight ahead with green eyes. The girl ran to the door and began to drum her hands on it fearfully. The protagonist stood and rested his back against the door. He took the mask off his face. Iso said to himself in an angry voice that this is exactly what the last of the Persilade family should do. The protagonist went into the observation room. There was a rodent in a chair near the monitors. Cheese turned and asked the guy if he had time to calm the girl down. The main character demanded of the assistant to let Lucille out. The assistant opened the control box with a key. He told the protagonist that he would be sorry if he endangered the girl. To waste no time, the rodent swung his fist around and pounded the red button on the remote. The cage the captive was in began to rise up into the ceiling. The prisoner felt her hands become free. The chains no longer restrained them. Lucille swung her arms to the side and said she could stretch now. The video camera followed the captive's actions with great attention and uninterrupted attention. Lucille realized that she was being followed on the videotape. She decided to turn to the side. Lucille told the main character on camera to get ready to see an incredible show. The rodent handed the main character a box of chips. He said. They were about to watch the show. The main character shoved the bag away from him and said it was just cheese chips. The rodent angrily told his master that he had never complained about cheese chips before. The subordinate hugged his master and reminded him that Lucille had a special collar around her neck. At the right moment, it could completely suppress the activity of her kill virus. The assistant invited the protagonist to make a bet. The prize would be control of the TV next week. Cheese said he was betting on Lucille. The girl at the time knocked on the metal door and wanted to get out. The protagonist is sternly told that he is betting on the ultimate disaster. The girl has no choice but victory. Lucille told her frightened rival not to waste her energy. She couldn't open the door. Lucille realized that her opponent had no desire to fight at all. The captive angrily told herself that she would kill the girl and the protagonist would belong to her. The rodent was looking at the monitor. He yelled out that Lucille was going to attack, and the girl didn't react at all. The captive angrily shouted to her rival to come to her and become her food. The girl ran sharply up to Lucille and seized her arm with her hand. Lucille staggered because her rival dared to grab her arm. The protagonist realized that his girlfriend had realized the mortal threat and decided to prepare for battle. The guy, along with his assistant, bumped their hands together. They were glad the girl was getting ready to fight. Lucille wondered. She did not understand why her rival had led her somewhere by the hand. The girl walked over to the metal door and pointed her finger fearfully at it. Rodin said with surprise. The girl grabbed Lucille's hand to help her open the door. The captive angrily asked her interlocutor, does she really want her to help her open the door? The stranger nodded happily to her rival. She was waiting for her help. The prisoner was very angry. She was disappointed by her rival's behavior. Lucille suddenly laughed evilly. She decided to finish the girl off. Lucille came up and told the main character on camera that his biological weapon turned out to be an idiot. The captive came close to the girl and grabbed her arm with her own hand. Lucille looked at her frightened rival and said she would show her how to get out of here. The captive grabbed her rival's arm. The girl's skin began to blacken. The stranger dropped to her knees. Her rival explained to her that the virus would destroy her to crisp bones. The girl looked fearfully at her body and noticed that it was starting to turn black. The prisoner angrily said the strongest biological weapon poisoned. Captive grabs her rival by the head and says to the protagonist that she is his single and strongest biological weapon. The rodent was looking very carefully at the girl's readings on the monitor. She said with consternation that the virus gets inside the girl and infects her blood, tissues, and organs. ISO said they ran tests and red blood cells should destroy any pathogen in the girl's body. They should also protect against contracting the Lucille virus. The stranger was lying on the floor. There were large dark spots all over her body. Lucille said, in an angry voice, that her rival was dying quickly and was completely boring for her. The assistant shouted fearfully to the master that the experiment must be stopped. The girl might not be able to stand it. The protagonist explained that the virus had infected very few cells in the stranger's body. It was far from lethal. ISO explained in a calm voice to his companion that all they had to do was keep calm and wait, at which time Lucille walked over to the nearest unconscious girl and put her foot on her head. Prisoner Saeed, her opponent, was very weak, and she was not interested in playing. The girl was lying on the ground and couldn't get up. Lucille put her foot on her head. The captive with burning eyes angrily inquired of her rival why she was now silent. The cheese screamed that the virus had already infected most of the cells on the girl's body. The experiment must be stopped. The protagonist said thoughtfully that the heart inside the girl is inexhaustible and the virus cannot affect it. Lucille said ISO wasn't really worried about her friend. She must have been wrong herself. The captive bent forward and looked at the girl. There were purple marks on her body. Lucille walked over to the unconscious girl and took her into her arms. Lucille held her unconscious rival in her arms and looked at her with interest. The captive gently touched her tongue to the victim's head. Lucille said thoughtfully, her victim is a garbage specimen, but it tastes unexpectedly pleasant. A huge predatory rat with burning eyes appeared next to the girl. It grabbed her with its teeth. The predator held her prey in her teeth. Lucille said she would now begin to enjoy herself. Cheese said excitedly that 90% of the girl's cells were infected. We can't wait any longer and must activate the protection collar on Lucille's head. The assistant reached out his paw to touch the big red button on the remote. Suddenly, the protagonist reached out his hand and grabbed the rodent's arm with it. Cheese turned around in surprise and looked at the guy. Iso didn't let him press the button. The protagonist sternly told his assistant to wait some more. Cheese told the guy with consternation that they couldn't watch Lucille devour the girl. The protagonist reminded the assistant that he hadn't been so soft-hearted to other experimental specimens before. Iso reminded his companion that their goal is to subjugate the world to the Persilade clan. Lucille is only a tool to achieve that goal. The protagonist suddenly heard someone call him master. The guy listened and heard someone calling him loudly on the comms. The boy saw that the girl was slowly but distinctly calling him master. Cheese was very surprised. He couldn't understand when the girl had time to start talking. The assistant asked the host, "Did he really teach the girl how to talk?" The guy replied that he taught her a little bit last night. Last night a stranger wanted to get on the bed, but the protagonist kicked her out. Iso sternly explained to the girl that experiments were not allowed on the bed. He looked at her carefully. The stranger lowered her gaze silently. Iso closed his eyes and thought about it. He decided to do something to help his girlfriend. The guy told the girl that if she called him master, he would let her lie on the bed for 30 minutes. The protagonist knew that the girl's body had once burned her vocal cords, but thanks to his fluid, the cords had long since recovered and healed. The guy thought that the girl couldn't speak now because her ligaments had been damaged for a very long time. She had already learned to speak. The main character turned to the girl and told her to repeat after him. The guy showed on his face how to pronounce the Jiaiwu sound correctly. Iso pointed his finger in the girl's face, how to pronounce the Gen sound correctly. The stranger looked at the boy fearfully. She tried to understand what he was saying to her. The girl tried to say something to the guy. She tried to activate her vocal cords. The protagonist looked with surprise at his interlocutor. He noticed that it was very difficult for her. The girl got very tense. She tried her best to say something. The main character was disappointed. He realized that his girlfriend was really dumb. The guy lay down on the bed and told his companion to go to bed quickly. The stranger lay on a pillow and covered herself with a blanket. She tried to say something to herself. Gradually, the girl began to have some sounds in her cords. The stranger lay down and tried slowly syllabicizing the word zoo. The girl tried to get away from Lucille and started saying the word master. Lucille angrily shouted to her rival that she couldn't even name the word master. The girl glared angrily at her rival and shouted for Ta to get ready. Suddenly, the electronic bracelet around her neck went off on Lucille's body. The girl was knocked to the ground by a massive electric shock. Lucille was on her knees and grabbing her collar with her hands. The guy activated an alchemical reaction called heat extraction. Lucille felt a strong discharge from the collar. She called out fearfully to the protagonist. Iso covered his eyes. He reached out his hand and placed it on the big red button. The protagonist told the assistant that if there were parts of the girl, it would be a real loss. The assistant told the guy that he only hit the emergency stop button because he's just an evil alchemist. Iso replied in a confident voice to the aide that it all goes without saying. The guy jumped up from his seat. He said he would go and get the useless girl out. The cheese turned around and asked the host, "Does he need any help?" The girl was lying on the floor, totally unconscious with her eyes closed. At which time someone approached the girl and looked at her closely. The stranger came to her senses and opened her eyes. The guy was looking at her intently. The girl called her friend master in a very happy voice. Iso looked at his acquaintance and demanded that she not call him master. The protagonist looked at his girlfriend sternly and said she didn't deserve it. The guy picked the girl up in his arms and prepared to carry her out of the room. The main character was holding a girl in his arms and carrying her. There were dark spots on her body. The stranger was looking intently at the protagonist. She didn't say anything. The girl called the protagonist master in a very slow voice. The guy said in a stern voice to the girl to keep quiet and wait for her punishment. Lucille was very unhappy about the guy leaving with her rival. The captive angrily asked the protagonist why he was doing this. Lucille angrily told the guy that he had never interfered before when she killed the rarest specimens. The protagonist held his girlfriend in his arms. He explained to his interlocutor that the girl's body had many important implants. Lucille could stroke them. Lucille said in an angry and demonic voice that everything was fine now. The rodent sat behind the chair and read the girly magazine intently. The assistant told the master that if he valued the girl, there was no need for a trial. There's a message on the monitor that Lucille's body temperature has reached minus 260 degrees. The machine showed that the temperature of Lucille's sample reached minus 250 degrees. A message appeared on the monitor that Lucille's temperature was minus 229. The monitor showed that the temperature of Lucille's sample had risen dramatically. Rodent, distracted. He looked at the machine with great excitement. Cheese was very much taken aback when he saw his host in the video. Iso walked up to the big doors. He was still carrying the girl in his arms. The aide shouted to the master over the comms to leave isolation room 0. The protagonist grudgingly explained to the rodent that he was screaming very loudly. His eardrums were almost damaged. Cheese angrily shouted over the comms that Lucille's bracelet had malfunctioned. Her temperature is very high. The main character got very worried. He asked his subordinate what he had said. The guy turned around and noticed an angry Lucille standing behind him. The girl angrily told the protagonist that the bracelet wasn't broken at all. She touched the collar. The girl angrily explained to the guy that viruses evolve in response to their environment. The captive reminded the head hero that she had been locked in isolation for over 1,000 days. Lucille explained to the protagonist that she had repeated something over and over again. The girl reported that she had purposely activated the Matrix. The girl angrily informed the protagonist that she had now evolved and gained resistance to the cold. The guy told the interviewer that she won and so he would fulfill his promise. Lucille looked at the guy and said in a sly voice that spending one day together with her would no longer be enough. The protagonist glared angrily at the girl. He didn't say anything back. Lucille looked at the protagonist with interest. The guy was taking off his mask at the time. The girl reached up to the protagonist's head and placed her palm on his face. The guy was in a lot of pain. The skin on his head turned black. The protagonist felt the virus of the dark plague was everywhere. Iso looked fearfully at his companion. His face continued to darken. Lucille angrily shouted to the guy that she had penetrated his body and could sense the activity of every cell inside him. Cheese stared at the monitor in amazement. He told the guy that his body was already infected with the virus. Lucille said in an angry voice that the viruses in the guy's body were dormant and under her control. The protagonist immediately felt his face go numb. The infection continued. The girl looked at the guy very carefully. She noticed something. Lucille saw that the guy's face had bacteria on it from the saliva of the ultimate disaster. The girl asked angrily, how on earth could Iso have had traces of the stranger's saliva on her face? Lucille ran up to the girl and grabbed her by the neck. She asked angrily, did Todd dare to kiss her boyfriend? The rodent said fearfully that Lucille is itself a large virus, so it can recognize biological signs at the cellular level. A very strong poisoning traveled down the girl's throat and began to spread through her body. The stranger's body kept striking. It had very dark markings on it. The stranger hung in space. Lucille supported her on her dark claws. Lucille angrily shouted to her rival that she would penetrate her every cell and make her feel intense pain. The stranger's body kept getting badly damaged. Her cells were breaking down. The girl screamed loudly. She felt a very intense pain in her body. The protagonist knew that Lucille could withstand almost any substance or poison. She could be suppressed with the collar's ultra-low temperatures. But now she had resistance to cold. Iso thought to himself that the void matter that could destroy everything was still being researched. If used prematurely, it could destroy the entire base. The protagonist looked at the strange girl. He didn't know what could be done to restrain Lucille. Suddenly, the assistant shouted to the master in a loud voice that he had found something. The main character was very surprised. He didn't understand what his assistant had just come up with. The rodent explained to his master over the comms that Lucille craved him. The protagonist thought about it. He realized that his assistant was right. Lucille glared angrily at her rival and said she would destroy everything else in her body. The main character called the girl's name from the side. She turned to him excitedly. Iso took the gun and put it to his head. He yelled at the girl to stop. Lucille was very surprised because of the guy's decision to use himself to threaten her. The protagonist held a gun to his head. He said that the girl's body was a valuable experimental asset of the Persilade family. The guy held a gun in his hands and said he can't conquer the world without a girl and get glory back. There's no meaning to life for him. While the rodent was following his master on a video link. He said the guy's acting skills had improved. Lucille bowed to her companion and said in a low voice that she understood everything. The protagonist was very surprised. He couldn't believe that the girl could agree so easily. Iso thought to himself that he might have found a new method of controlling his captive. The girl jumped up and shouted that she would devour her rival and lead the restoration of the ISO family and conquer the world. Lucille glared angrily at the girl and said that she could be a breeding ground for the virus. The protagonist said in a disgruntled voice that he would have to use Trump for himself. The aide asked the guy why didn't he use Trump against the girl before. The guy closed his eyes and thought to himself that his Trump would be very humiliating. The protagonist shouted to the interviewer that he would agree to hug her every night if she would stop. Lucille was very surprised. She looked at the protagonist with great amazement. The girl happily ran up to the guy and asked, "Is it all true?" And he told her it was all true. Lucille hugged the boy and pulled him close to her. She was very happy. Iso turned around and asked the girl again if she was willing to make such a deal. Lucille says she may not kill her rival, but she also has 2 conditions. The protagonist asked the girl, what are her other conditions? Lucille, in a sly voice, demanded that the protagonist switch places between her and his girlfriend. The rival must stay in the cell forever. Iso thought grudgingly to himself that he would have to agree to the girl's terms. He would have to find new ways to suppress Lucille. The girl smiled slyly at the guy. She wanted to tell him her second condition. Lucille turned around and screamed for her rival to wake up soon. The girlfriend pinned the protagonist down and yelled at him to watch closely. Lucille looked at the guy and said his girlfriend stole his first kiss. The protagonist was surprised to see Lucille move close to him for a kiss. The stranger was wary. She looked intently at the protagonist and the girl beside him. The stranger suddenly felt inside herself that she had an ache in her chest for some reason. Lucille wouldn't let go of the protagonist. She kept kissing him. The boy opened his eyes wide. He looked at the girl across from him with great surprise. Lucille stood against the protagonist and kept kissing him non-stop. The rodent thought to himself that he didn't even know whether to be happy or sad. Lucille let go of the protagonist and moved her head back away from him. The girl looked at the guy with a very sly look. She felt pleased. Lucille studied the lad with great interest with her enthusiastic gaze. The girl slyly told the guy that his saliva tasted really wonderful. She said he still liked violet berry paste. The protagonist ran away and started spraying disinfectant on himself. Lucille told him that her cells were already permanently rooted in his body. A stranger stood at the side. She looked at the sad protagonist with great excitement. The girl felt deep inside her that her heart was pounding unhappily. The girl grabbed her stomach with her hands. She felt her breasts ache. The girl had miniature spiked microbes inside her bloodstream. Malignant microbes began to float within the system and invade the blood cells. The girl's mutation was still going on inside. She was under the influence of the alien general. Lucille turned to the side. She looked at her rival with great scrutiny. The girl stood with her eyes closed. She felt the strength in her body. Lucille was very frightened. She could not believe that her rival could have strength. Suddenly, the stranger reached forward and grabbed her opponent by the throat. The stranger stood and calmly held Lucille by the throat with her hand. Suddenly, the girl's hand turned black. She used it to squeeze her rival even harder. Iso, frightened, thought he saw the left hand of the angel of purification in front of him. The stranger looked at Lucille and said she hated her. The girl roared with all her might, her hand on Lucille's throat to finish her off. The guy sat and looked at the large bird in front of him. He didn't understand why this lava sparrow still hadn't fainted. The bird of prey looked unhappily at the man with burning eyes. The guy attacked the huge bird with his beam of bright fire. The warrior stood in front of a huge sparrow. The bird gave him a predatory look. The guy said in a satisfied voice that Chow had already safely left the ring island in the underworld. That was enough for him. The girl said in a disgruntled voice to the guy that self-sacrifice on her own initiative was not something she was grateful for. There was a very bright explosion. A large pillar of fire flew forward and crashed into the blue transparent wall. The girl stood and held her arm straight out in front of her. The guy called out to her from behind and called Chow. The warrior sat and looked at his girlfriend with excitement. She fended off the attack with her hand. The girl walked over and put her hand on her friend's face. He was surprisingly silent. Chow looked at the guy and told him to never leave her alone again. The girlfriend put her arm around the guy and moved closer to him. He looked at her silently. The warrior decided that the girl would kiss him and directed his face toward her. Chow suddenly swung her foot and knocked the guy with a swinging kick to the face. The girl angrily shouted to the guy that the kissing scene had to be filmed from a deceptive angle. The director was sitting in her chair. She shouted loudly that everything had been filmed. The cameraman was standing next to her. The director told the huge bird that they had prepared a dinner of deep-sea trepangs for her. The White Queen was the filming base of the White Queen Film Company in Gaodang. The director brought a drink for an actress named the White Queen. The woman told the actress that the guy had only recently been hired and was not familiar with local customs, but he was well suited for the role of the town's first mayor. The actress said that the guy doesn't have an ounce of charisma from her father and his acting is disgusting. The director told the girl that they had already changed actors for the role of Mr. Gowden more than 700 times. More than 2,000 people came to the auditions. The actress responded to the interview that she will increase the crew's budget by $2 billion, at which time her subordinate approached the actress from the side and told her something important. A woman was very surprised to hear that her bank had been robbed. An employee reported that the bank was robbed by a man and a rodent race. They used a poison gas device. The woman showed the actress a small box of green containers. The actress scrutinized the box with the poison gas inside. The girl noticed something interesting on the box. She looked closely. The actress saw that the bomb had a special purple-colored branding on the side. An employee was holding a cage with a green mutant. She said the detective had been struck by an unknown biological weapon. The actress told her subordinate to tell the patrol officers they were no longer needed. The subordinate wanted to say something about a hero's performance zone. The actress turned her head to the side and closed her eyes. A white glow appeared around her. White spots appeared on the side of the girl's body. There was a small, bright light around her. The actress's gaze became cold and icy. She was thinking about something to herself. The woman got to her feet and said the robbers might have the answer to an important question. The actress commanded her subordinate to mobilize all company resources and find the robbers. The director asked the actress what about the filming. The woman replied that the filming had to stop. She had more important things to do. She added that the crew's salaries had to be paid in full. The actress remembered the guy. She turned around and headed towards the actor. The actress walked up to the guy. The actor was sitting down and there were women with swords standing next to him. The actress angrily asked the guy, did he really want to kiss her? The actor fearfully said he was wrong. The woman tossed a small piece of ice over her hand. It was an ice prison. The actress put an ice cube in the guy's mouth. He fought back as hard as he could. A woman told a guy she'd forgive him when he defrosted a block of ice in his mouth. The actress turned around and walked towards the exit. She thought that in the whole world only her father could touch her with his lips. The wooden bucket twisted and spilled water all over the floor. A little girl with purple hair was trembling fearfully. She was holding a teddy bear in her hands. The woman asked the girl sternly who was letting her play while she scrubbed the floor. The hostess slipped her hand in and took the toy from the frightened girl's hands. The woman threw the teddy bear straight into the water on the floor. The landlady angrily shouted at the girl for carrying that stuff around with her all the time. The girl asked in a tearful voice that Auntie Jimin should not step on the toy. The woman swung around and slapped the child in the face with her hand. The man grudgingly told the woman that she could not be rude to the girl because of the spilled water. The daughter was frightened. The landlady angrily reminded the man, Mara, that she was the one who had thrown him out of the acting troupe, where there wasn't even enough to eat. The man hesitated. He said nothing to the woman and stared silently in front of him. A strange guy showed up at the side. He approached the hostess about teaching the child to be a soldier. The landlady pointed her finger at the girl. Mare was not pleased. He did not understand who could have entered the house without knocking. The guy angrily said that in the entire kingdom, hellhounds can go in wherever they want. The man was very surprised when he realized that the guy in front of him was a hellhound. Mare looked angrily at the woman and wondered what she was up to. Jimin replied that she wanted to find a good use for the girl. The landlady said that she had asked that the girl be considered. The child at that time grabbed her toy. The fighter walked over and looked at the child. The woman said that the girl, though small, she is very strong. She can serve in the hellhounds. The fighter looked at the girl with great attention. He noted that she had a very expressive look in her eyes. The child was very frightened. He held Mishka close to him and looked at the stranger. After a little deliberation, the fighter said he was taking the girl. The soldier carried the child away. The girl screamed to her father that she didn't want to be taken away. The girl woke up on the bed. She looked up fearfully in front of her. The stranger turned to the side and noticed her bear cub lying next to her beside the pillow. The protagonist was in the lab with his assistant. The rodent said that the super rabbit had lost the wool on its chest for some reason. The cheese told the owner that the girl had been lying unconscious for 3 days. The protagonist replied that the patient's vital signs were stable. She should be fine. Inside the dark castle, there were drips hanging from them. The solution flowed through them to the old man. The girl was standing by the medical machine. She was looking at the patient's readings. The girl with the mask on her face brought her hands up to the medical board. The leader of the hellhounds, named Potter, sat on his throne in the castle. At that time, a guy named Dober entered the room. He bowed and addressed the leader. The master was sitting on his throne. He asked his subordinate how their elimination operations were going. Dober informed the master that the intruders had been killed while trespassing in the gold district of Godin. Potter said even his best fighters couldn't break into the gold district and eliminate the traitors. The subordinate said that apart from Yorkshire, only the girl is still alive, but her whereabouts are unknown. Potter jumped up sharply on his throne. He shouted to his subordinates to find the girl for him. The stranger sat on the couch and cradled Mishka to her. The main character walked beside her. The guy was silent. He continued to walk by the couch. The girl watched him fearfully. Iso stopped suddenly. He put his hand up and shouted what he had come up with. The main character pointed his hand at the girl and said she would have a new name. The stranger was completely at attention. She looked at the guy next to her. Iso said her name would be Tsu Air. The protagonist asked the assistant if he wanted to know why he called the girl Z Air. The rodent replied that he wanted to know the answer to that question. The boy remembered his mother showing him a flower called Tsu. Cheese pointed his hand at the girl and said that she was now officially the second superhazardous experimental specimen. Iso replied that Tsu Air was number 1 on their list of superhazardous objects. The main character said that Tsuer is very unstable and completely lacks the will to attack. They need to analyze and figure out what exactly is causing the angel of destruction in her left hand. The protagonist thought. He clearly remembered before him how the girl's hand turned dark and fire came out of it. Cheese angrily explained to his master that the girl only wanted to sleep with him. Iso angrily shouted at the rodent to stop talking nonsense. The guy thought to himself that at a certain moment Tsu thought that Lucille had attacked him. This awakened the girl's fighting spirit. As a result, Tsu struck with a heat ray. The cheese turned around angrily and asked the protagonist, "What was that heat ray?" The protagonist said he called the fiery ray the ability of the Angel of Destruction's left hand. The guy said that the temperature produced by the fiery ray was very different. The second time the temperature reached the solar flare. As a result, the Lucille virus in the girl's body was instantly destroyed. Cheese said thoughtfully, thanks to the cold collar and energy neutralization, Lucille was able to survive. The protagonist remembered his prisoner. Lucille was at this time lying in a green aquarium. The girl was sitting on the bed in her room at the time. The main character came in. Tsu turned around and looked at the guy with very great surprise. The girl felt something rumbling in her stomach. She put her hands there. Tsu gestured to her face. She told her master she was hungry. The assistant told the guy that he had never fed the girl yet. Iso replied that he had never thought about the fact that food would be needed for Tsu as a source of energy. The main character said in a cheerful voice that he would prepare the most nutritious and caloric meal for the girl. The cheese was very surprised. He angrily asked the protagonist what he had prepared for the girl. The guy bowed happily and told his assistant that he had prepared this. A surprised girl stood nearby. There was a huge dragon lying in the room. The protagonist and the rodent were arguing with each other. The dragon heard a very loud noise. He opened his eyes and looked around. The dragon saw that the main character was standing in front of him with a girl beside him. The monster frighteningly told his master that he had come to strip him of his uniform for punishment. Iso told the monster in a sly voice that he would have a sly chance to distinguish himself. The dragon wondered what his chance would be. The protagonist slyly told the monster that he would be food for the girl. The dragon was very frightened. He looked at the guy petrified. The assistant told the guy that the dragon is the only one they have. It can't be fed as food to the girl. Iso replied that if the dragon is fed to Tsu, it will help restore energy. The guy looked slyly in front of him and said that the girl could evolve into a second form. The protagonist demanded of the girl that she absorb dangerous object number 8. Tsu happily pointed her hand in the direction. The girl pounced happily on the monster's back. The dragon promised its master that it would never mischief again. The protagonist angrily replied to his ward that it was too late for him to make excuses. Z swung her teeth around and prepared to claw at the dragon's back. The girl cried unhappily and didn't like the food. Iso thought his girlfriend was completely useless. The main character poured hot water from a pitcher into a box of pasta. The girl was sitting in the kitchen at the table. The main character was standing next to her. There was also a rodent sitting at the table. Iso explained to the girl the instant noodles in front of her. 3 minutes later, the guy opened the package on the pasta. It's cooked in that time. The girl looked very admiringly at the pasta inside the box. The main character told his girlfriend in a calm voice to get the sticks. The guy opened his eyes and looked at the girl. He reminded her to pick up her chopsticks. Iso noticed with great surprise how the girl was eating the pasta with great appetite with her hands. The main character rushed to the girl. He yelled at her to eat with chopsticks. Zai grabbed the food with her hands and pushed it into her mouth with great appetite. The girl ate and smiled happily. She said it was delicious. The guy looked at the girl and said she was very shameful as she ate the noodles and cried. The rodent said the girl had never tasted anything delicious before. The main character told a story when his assistant was an uneducated rat and crawled into his room. After that, the rodent ate cheese to the brim and could not escape. The cheese replied to the owner that his mother breastfed him until he was 3 years old. The main character angrily yelled that he'd stopped drinking breast milk since he was 6 months old. The guy launched a plate at the aide. Iso was fighting with his assistant. They were throwing kitchen stuff at each other. The girl was calmly consuming pasta from a bucket. The guy was arguing with the rodent, and they were throwing various things at each other. Zai finished her meal and put the bucket on the table. The protagonist turned around in surprise. He noticed that the girlfriend held out a bucket to him. Z smiled and told the guy cheerfully that it was delicious to her. Iso wiped the girl's face. She sat quietly at the table and tolerated it. Z looked carefully at her food pail. It was completely empty. Very quickly, there was a pile of empty dishes on the table. Tsu consumed the pasta with gusto. The girl's appetite was very large. She learned to use the sticks to consume food. Zai put the empty bucket on the table and smiled happily. After a short pause, the girl held out an empty bucket for the protagonist with a smile. Iso turned to the side and asked his subordinate to bring another packet. The rodent poured boiling water into the pasta. An hour later, a scared guy was looking at his girlfriend. He yelled at her to stay away from him. The guy was holding a gun in front of him. He said he had the last pack of waffles left. The girl moved leisurely across the floor toward the guy. There were empty food wrappers all around her. Zai said with a big smile that everything was delicious and she wanted more. The main character got angry. He realized he had to take the rest of his food. Iso grabbed a waffle pack and discovered it very quickly. The main character started eating the waffles quickly. He realized he had to eat them all quickly himself. The guy fell to the floor. The girl on top of him put her hands on him. Z pulled her face to the boy's face and kissed him with all her might. The guy felt the girl moving her tongue in his mouth. She wanted to take the food away. The girlfriend wouldn't let go of the guy. She still kept kissing him. Z hugged her friend with all her might and pressed herself against him. The main character felt like he couldn't breathe. Tsu wanted to take the food out of his mouth. The main character collapsed on the floor unconscious with his eyes closed. The girl had partially satiated herself with food. The rodent was listening intently at this time. He was waiting for the girl to come to him for food. The cheese was in his food storage. He realized that he would protect the food until the end. The rodent was in the middle of the warehouse. He said he'd created it all with sweat and blood. The girl was crawling in the kitchen at the time. There were empty food wrappers all around her. Suddenly, Z heard a suspicious odor. She sniffed carefully. The girl picked up the towel on the floor and looked carefully in front of her. Z placed her burning hand on the floor to make her way deeper down. The rodent in the basement was very frightened. He lifted his head up and stared intently. Cheese was startled to see the ceiling in his warehouse begin to melt and metal dripped from it. The rodent backed up and jumped away. He was very frightened. The girl jumped inside the warehouse through a large hole in the ceiling. Z landed after a jump on the floor. Her hand was black and red hot. The girl got to her feet. The rodent pointed a gun at her. He said his cheese was his priceless collection. The girl ran up to the rodent very sharply. The cheese was very frightened of her. Zai reached out her hand and used it to grab the weapon in the rodent's hands. Cheese felt his huge automaton getting very hot. He couldn't hold it any longer. The rodent let the weapon out of his hands. It was already beginning to melt. Cheese blew on his hand with great consternation. He burned himself with his automaton. Cheese glanced in front of him and noticed that his weapon had melted into the girl's hand. The rodent was frightened. He fell to the ground and told himself it was the end. The girl reached out her hands and grabbed a package of cheese. She started to open it. Z sat down cheerfully on the floor and began to consume the cheese from the packages very quickly. The girl was sitting near a huge shelf. Food wrappers were lying on the floor next to her. The rodent dropped to his knees. He said the girl hadn't left him a single bite. It was quiet in the lab at this time. Various mutants were sitting in glass cages. The one-eyed mutant told the dragon that Iso wanted to feed him to Big Sis. The dragon replied to the monster that humans underestimated his toughness. The dragon's horns cracked on his head. He said the horns were the hardest part of his body. The monster screamed very unhappily. Its large and powerful horns were very hurt. The protagonist imprisoned his girlfriend for eating his supplies. Iso sighed in a disgruntled voice that the girl couldn't resist high-calorie sweets. especially chocolate. The main character was standing with his assistant near a glass capsule. He said they had no food left in the kitchen. Iso turned to the assistant and wondered why the latter was silent. The rodent said angrily that the girl had eaten as much as 400 pieces of the most expensive cheese. The cheese angrily shouted that such an obnoxious girl deserved to be severely punished. The rodent took out a huge saw. He said he would cut the tsu into many pieces with the destroyer. The protagonist reminded the assistant that the girl was very beautiful. The cheese took out a huge cylinder. He said he would wash Z's eyes with alchemical acid. The guy reminded him that the girl was very pretty. Cheese pulled out a huge jar with a ravenous mosquito inside. He threatened that he would make the brain eater clean his brain for tsu. Iso once again reminded his subordinate that the girl was very beautiful. The rodent told the owner to just lightly punish the girl and that would be the end of it. Cheese said the girl needed to be taught a lesson. Iso thought his subordinate was a wimp. The protagonist thought the girl should be punished. Otherwise, the base will no longer be able to eat sweets in peace. A guy walked up to his girlfriend. He asked if she was prepared. Iso had the girl in his arms. He turned her around so he could hit her from behind. The protagonist swung his arm. He remembered that the girl's mind was on the level of a 2-year-old child. Iso took his hand far to the side and prepared to knock the girl. The protagonist slapped his girlfriend's hand on the back of her legs with all his might. Zai felt an unpleasant pain. She held back from screaming. Iso was punishing the girl and telling her why he was beating her from behind. Zai turned very red after very strong and powerful blows. Tears appeared on the girl's face. She felt the pain after the punishment. Iso continued to spank his girlfriend. He said she wouldn't dare anymore now. Cheese was sitting next to him at the table. The rodent told his master that they now urgently needed to go shopping. The main character looked at the girl. He said he still hadn't even eaten his dinner yet. The guy hit the girl from behind with all his might. He said it was all because of her. Cheese thoughtfully told his host that they needed to decide what to do about the girl. Cheese suggested leaving the girl at the base. Iso fearfully replied that Tsu would destroy the base after they left. Tsu was lying on the couch unmoving. She was holding a toy. The main character looked at her and said she should take it with her. The guy started getting dressed to go shopping. He threw on a vest. The rodent dressed for going out on the town. He hooked a leather belt on his shoulder. The protagonist continued to dress. His assistant threw on a robe and picked up the ampules of weapons. Iso put on his goggles. Zai looked fearfully at the guy along with the rodent. She stood and held the toy in her hands. Cheese lifted the girl's hand up. He said that the pose should be spectacular. The protagonist explained to the girlfriend that she should look sprawling, even if they were going out to get food. The protagonist tells his assistant to activate the alchemical transport matrix. They head to the lighthouse area. The rodent indicated on the remote that they needed to move to the beacon area. The protagonist, along with his companions, stood in the center of the teleportation arena. The girl was very frightened. She was silent and put her hands to her chest. The girlfriend gently reached out and took the protagonist by the glove. Iso turned around and looked at the girl excitedly. He didn't say anything to her. The protagonist thought his girlfriend was a very complex character. The protagonist commanded his companions to prepare to close their eyes. Iso reached sharply to his side and covered the girl's eyes with it. A very bright light appeared from below the arena. The guy and his companions prepared to teleport. A bright pentagram appeared on the floor. It glowed pink. The protagonist found himself on the roof of a large building after teleporting. Iso shouted joyfully that he had finally made it to his criminal paradise. The protagonist stood with his companions on the roof of a high-rise building. They were in the city of Golden. In the center of the city stood the unquenchable lighthouse. Its height was more than 1,000 meters. Iso said there are 32 teleportation points. He likes the lighthouse area best. You can see all of Golden from here. Zai was standing near the railing on the roof. She looked down in admiration. The protagonist told his assistant to buy normal clothes for the girl. The guy said to go to the glamorous Gamera Boulevard. There they would find something suitable for the girl. The rodent said the girl didn't have to wear different clothes. There was hardly any money left from the bank robbery. Iso explained that during the procurement, they would be looking for a place for the next crime. Without expensive clothes, they would not be allowed into the elite places. The main character told his girlfriend to hold his hand. Z very timidly and tentatively reached out her hand to the guy's hand. The main character abruptly jumped off the lighthouse balcony and flew down with the girl. The main character was falling down the beacon. He was holding his girlfriend in his arms. Iso commanded that the anti-gravity alchemical matrix be activated. The guy looked at the girl. His girlfriend closed her eyes in fear. Iso with great care and carried the girl gently in his arms at his side. Sue calmed down and opened her eyes. She looked around at the city around her. The protagonist was flying over the water, with his assistant following behind him. The guy commanded the deputy that they were headed to Gamera Avenue. The rodent said he wanted to go get a hot dog first. The protagonist and his companions found themselves in the city of Golden. In the center of the city near the fountain stood a tall statue of a golden girl. Sue approached the statue and examined it with great admiration. A guy stood nearby. The protagonist was sitting on a bench. He couldn't understand why his subordinate hadn't returned yet. A boy and a woman were walking on the side. He told Mom that his older sister had climbed high and pointed upward. The protagonist said, "No fool will climb the Gamera statue. It's under the special supervision of the heroes." The protagonist got worried. He realized that the older sister could have been a girl. The main character started wagging his head in all directions. He was still sitting on the bench. Iso lifted his gaze upward to the statue. He saw the girl climbing there. The protagonist yelled at the girl to get off the high ground immediately. Zai quickly and successfully climbed on top of the golden statue and sat down there. Z happily waved her hand at the protagonist and called him master. Cheese stood outside and sprinkled himself leisurely from a box of peppers into a hot dog. Cheese was standing near the counter. He yelled at the tied-up salesman for adding sour ketchup to it. The rodent sniffed carefully and looked at the food with great appetite. The rodent took a bite of the hot dog. He told himself that his master would be displeased again because of his delay. Cheese turned to the side and noticed with surprise the police officers running down the street. The rodent noticed that a great many people ran up to the golden statue. The cheese couldn't understand what was going on. He just stepped away for a while and there was a commotion. A policeman addressed the girl on top of the statue over the loudspeaker. He demanded that she come down immediately. Zai was very frightened. She sat on top of the statue and looked down fearfully. The rodent looked at the statue. He figured the girl could get a year in jail. He had to do something about it. Cheese put on his goggles. He decided to leave and hide out. The rodent turned around. He decided to pretend to be a random passerby and run away. At which time the protagonist inside the crowd tossed a grenade upwards. The grenade above the crowd went off, and there was a very bright explosion. The cheese stopped at that time. Iso shouted that next time he would definitely not take a grenade with him. The men were all lying on the earth. The rodent grabbed his knife. He started using it to rip the clothes off the cops. Cheese told the host that he was taking the role of decoy. Iso replied to the subordinate that he was just trying to blend in with the crowd to escape. One of the cops woke up. He had his hand on his head. The cop tried to get up, but instead he tripped and fell to the ground. Iso and his companions approached the storefront window and leaned against it. The protagonist said in a tired voice that the girl could take him to his grave. A store clerk shouted at passers-by to move away from their stained glass window. An employee at the store yelled out that the family's stained glass window was made of flowing crystal. The guy told his assistant that the salesman. He was told that stained glass is easy to get dirty. He wondered what they would do. The cheese was very wickedly pleased. He ran up to the verse and laid his paws on it. The vendor shouted at passers-by that they didn't understand human language. The rodent took a large green bill and stuck it outside the store. The seller was very surprised. He couldn't believe that ordinary passers-by had a lot of money. Cheese took a few more large bills in his hands and began to glue them onto the glass. The rodent had covered the entire outside display case with large bills to drool over. The protagonist respectfully told the clerk that they tipped the glass of his store. The salesman bowed to the visitors and invited them into the store. Iso demanded that he be brought the most expensive evening gowns for the girl. The salesman ran out into the street with great care and picked up the bills that had been tacked on. Iso waved his hand at the salesman. The man looked at him happily and collected the bills on the glass. The salesman bowed and asked the customer, what does he want for himself? Iso gestured to the side and said he needed clothes for his girlfriend. The salesman asked the girl what kind of dress she would like to try on. Sue turned around. She looked at the salesman with great surprise. The girl smiled very broadly and cheerfully and answered nothing to the man. The salesman was very much astonished. He said to himself that he had never seen such a flawless beauty. The man looked away and thought the beauty had fallen into the hands of a scoundrel. Iso commanded the salesman to bring out evening gowns for the girl and let her try them on. The salesgirl showed up. She was carrying a whole bunch of suits on the counter. A saleswoman approached a customer and said they would help her try on an evening gown. Iso plopped down in the chair very tiredly. He had to wait for his girlfriend to get dressed. A salesman came up from the side. He poured tea from a jug for the boy and offered him a taste. Iso replied that he would not drink such bitter nastiness. Cheese was trying on a cap for himself near the mirror. The main character demanded that the assistant give him a soda. Cheese threw the guy a can. He said he was picking out a hat for himself to wear to a nightclub. 20 minutes passed. The protagonist couldn't understand why his girlfriend was taking so long. A salesgirl peeked out from behind a screen. She told the guy that the girl wouldn't let him take her clothes off. The main character went into the fitting room. He saw a girl sitting there very scared. The guy demanded that his girlfriend not be cranky and get her clothes off sooner. The girlfriend screamed fearfully. She looked at the protagonist with green eyes. The workers helped the girl take off her clothes and put her in a dress. The guy was sitting in a chair. He kept repeating to the girl in the locker room that he was right next to her. The workers helped Tzu to change his clothes. She stood and kept calling out to her master. Iso was sitting in the chair. He kept repeating to his girlfriend that he was close by. Tzu was scared. She kept calling the guy and calling him Mr. The protagonist sat in his seat and insisted to the girl that he was still around. Tzu came out of the locker room wearing an expensive evening gown called Scarlet Evening. Iso looked at the girl with great admiration. He realized that dresses were coming for her. The salesman came over and told the guy that this outfit looked perfect on his girlfriend. The protagonist angrily told the man that his client was nothing but his maid. The salesman thought that his client was nothing but a boastful rich boy. Tzu told the seller that this dress did not meet his requirements. He asked, "Is there anything else?" The man told the protagonist that even the guests from the Golden Quarter are their regulars. Z came out of the locker room in a white dress. It was called the Purest Core. The main character looked at the girl and said the dress was unusual, but not very formal. He wanted to try on something else. Z came out of the fitting room wearing a golden dress. It was called the Golden Empress. The main character stared mesmerized at his girlfriend. He didn't say anything to her. A salesman came running up from the side. He insisted on calling the guy a young gentleman. The man said that this dress was modeled after their empress's dress. At that time, there was the sound of a car pulling up outside. A large limousine stopped outside the store. Two servants got out of the car. They carried a large black carpet with them. The servants spread the carpet near the car and spread it out on the earth. There was a long black carpet stretched out beside the car. It had a special symbol on it. The man said excitedly that Miss from the Black Palace family should come to them. The salesman took his customers into the fitting room and told them to hide in there. The man indicated to the people inside the fitting room to be quiet there. They should wait for him until Miss from the Black Palace left. The limo doors opened and a woman stepped out. She was wearing expensive jewelry. The client got out of the car. A red-clad security guard stood beside her. A lady from the Black Palace named Renee was pacing barefoot on a black carpet. Renee stopped halfway through. She told her guard that her feet were a little cold. The guard bowed to her mistress and told her to keep it for her. The woman grabbed her blade and swung it from side to side. After a few powerful swings of the sword, bright flames appeared all around. The guard pointed her hand to the side and said her mistress could pass. Two servants were straightening the carpet and pulling it up to the front of the store. The man bowed to the girl and greeted the miss from the Black Palace. Renee told the salesman to lead her to a limited edition black gothic Lolita-style dress. The man told the girl that they refused other customers to have the dress waiting just for her. The protagonist carefully opened the screen inside the fitting room in the store. He watched everything carefully. The lad, together with his companions, were carefully watching the guests in the store through the curtain. Cheese told his friends excitedly that Miss from that very Black Palace had come to visit them. The main character explained that the Black Palace is home to one of the world's most aristocratic families. The girl was very excited. She was looking at the customer in the store like a mesmerized woman. Cheese couldn't understand why aristocrats would show up in such a place. The main character explained that the privileges of aristocrats without commoners lose their charm. The servants continued to uncover the carpet on which their mistress was walking. The salesman bowed to the girl and explained that she was almost to the right place. The man pointed to an outfit that was hidden under a large blanket. Renee stopped suddenly at the rug. The salesman looked at her in bewilderment. One of the servants startled to notice that they had run out of carpet. They rolled it all up. The servant told the mistress in a guilty voice that they were out of carpet. The guard angrily told the servants that they had not prepared enough carpet. Their mistress cannot walk on muddy ground. The boys dropped to their knees and started yelling to Mrs. Tengu that they were both to blame. Tengu glared angrily at the servants and said that it was up to them to know how to correct such a mistake. The servant was very excited. He even had sweat dripping from his face from excitement. One of the servants grabbed the blade and pulled it out with a determined motion. The servants plunged their knives into themselves. They prepared to perform a ritual called the Heart of the Blade. Suddenly, the fighters noticed their weapons scattered and dissolved. The Shinkun warrior told the servants to leave the killing. He reminded them that God calls for mercy. The boy plopped down on his knees. He excitedly thanked Mr. Zinkun. The warrior swung around and stabbed one of the servants in the stomach with his spear with all his might. The two servants were lying on the earth. Mistress Renee approached them. Shinkun pointed forward with his hand. He told the mistress that she could go on. Renee stepped her foot on the servant's head and prepared to move on. Mistress was walking on the servants, supported at her side by warriors to keep her from falling. Chi said unhappily to himself that the world's nobility is very arrogant. Iso pleased with himself that a good opportunity had arisen for them. The rodent inquired of his master, "What is their opportunity now?" Iso cheerfully said they could kidnap the mistress from the Black Palace. The world's nobles never leave the Golden District. They now have a unique chance. Cheese told his master that their lives might be over now. The protagonist replied to him that they could do something great. Persilade's name might become famous. Servant told his master that every world aristocratic family had been around for millennia and had great influence. Renee walked slowly over the body of the servant and approached where the dress stood. Mrs. stood near the outfit, which was under a curtain. Next to it was a salesman. The man grabbed the bedspread with his hand. He told the girl that he was about to show her a limited edition dress. Iso angrily asked his assistant, would the main villain of Golden not mess with the world's aristocrats? Cheese grabbed his master by his clothes. He demanded that the man not provoke him. Suddenly, there was a very loud noise from the side. The protagonist and his assistant turned to the side. Renee and her guards were surprised to notice that the outfit on the mannequin was very badly damaged. The salesman was very frightened. A frightened employee was standing next to him. The customer angrily asked the man if he was the one who had left such a special dress for her. Tanky gripped her sword angrily. She prepared to attack the salesman. The warrior angrily told the salesman that no god would save him this time. The protagonist asked his subordinate, was it all his pranks? The cheese explained to the guy that he was bored waiting, so he damaged his dress to piss off the store clerk. Z looked in front of him with very great interest and amazement. The girl carefully stepped forward in front of her and caught hold of her outfit. The customer looked at the store employees and asked, who did it? The salesperson started to justify himself. At that time, the main character fell out of the fitting room. Renee and the guards looked at him with interest. The man pointed sideways with his hand at the protagonist and said he did it all. The cheese covered his face with his hands with great consternation. He realized that the end had come for him. The guard walked over to the protagonist and grabbed his clothes with her hand. She lifted the guy off the ground. She said, did he do all this? Iso smiled calmly at the woman and confirmed that he had done it all. Tanky looked at the guy angrily and incredulously. She was very angry. The rodent was very surprised. He didn't understand why his master had confessed everything so easily. The man looked around excitedly and with interest. He thought that if the guy didn't die today, he would have to die. Tanky gave the guy a very angry look. She threatened him that she would gouge his eyes out. The guard held out her claw and stopped it right next to the guy's eye. Renee suddenly ordered her guard to stop. The mistress said she liked the guy's altered dress. The salesman was very impressed. He couldn't believe Renee could like that outfit. There was an equally surprised protagonist and his assistant standing nearby. Iso decided that the woman was in over her head.